All right. Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Liberation Podcast. Today we will be discussing, analyzing, and reviewing Uprising by Margaret Peterson Haddix. Chris and I have adopted a Palestinian family that is currently still stuck in Gaza. Mohammed's neighborhood was bombed and killed 22 members of his family, leaving him responsible for his 4 younger siblings who were pulled from the rubble. We have their family's GoFundMe linked in the description, and they're very close to their goal. So please donate below. So hopefully they can reach it and they can leave Gaza. Don't forget there is a link below to sign up for our free newsletter where you can get more information and updates about us in the podcast. For more content outside of the podcast, please check out our Instagram and TikTok at Literary Liberation and Twitter at LitLibPodcast. I'm your co-host, Mariah, and you can find me at Hungry Mariah on all social media platforms.
And I'm your co-host, Kristen. You can find me at KRXXTXN on all social media platforms. Let's go. Mariah's favorite book of the year. Spoilers.
Spoiler, it is. I have been waiting for Kristen to read this. When Kristen was in Portland, I got the opportunity to hand her my paperback because I got super lucky at the secondhand store and I found a first edition copy. So
I'm sorry, that cover is so ugly.
it's so ugly. I do like the other cover. This is not my favorite, but it's a first edition, so it's like, what do you do? What do you do?
What's it look like if you take off the dust jacket?
It's just orange. I like the text on the side.
Well, because I hate dust jackets one in general, but my King of Scars and World of Wolves, I think the covers of them are so ugly and I like the book underneath it better. So I just took off the
Hmm.
dust jacket and that's how they're displayed on my shelf. And the dust jackets are hidden behind the other books. So I think if
Yeah,
you
so
display it
it's
sideways like that, it'll look good. But like you can't cover out, it's kind of ugly. Sorry.
no, you're right. I was just happy I found it like hardback for the shelf.
Anyways, moving on to the book, what it's about, I guess. Because I feel like this is not a book talk book. I know, like, our whole thing is, like, reviewing book talk books. I don't know how Mariah found this book, so you could probably
Found it at the
insight us.
Goodwill. If I'm
No,
gonna be
like,
honest, I found
you found
for
it at
real.
the and that's how you're like, "Oh,
Yeah,
we
I
should read
found
this?"
that copy of The Uprising at the Goodwill, my small Goodwill in like rural Southern Oregon. And I was like, oh, this looks really interesting. It was in the kids section. And then I looked at it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is about the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. It sat on my shelf for like a year. And then I picked it up and I was like, oh my God, this is actually a really good book. And I saw like the positive representation of like Bolsheviks and like communists. And I was like, what the fuck? How was this at my, like, I live in a red county. We are very yee here. So I was like, how the fuck did this wind up in my
That's why they
Goodwill?
put it in there.
That's
'Cause
probably why I got it in
they're
the
like,
Goodwill.
"Get this out of here. Get this out of my house."
Another
Oh,
man's trash is another man's treasure, as they say. So it was just a diamond in the rough that never happens at the Goodwill. And then I looked into the author, and she writes some really interesting books. And apparently, she's very popular. A lot of people say that they read her books growing up, which I never did.
I never even heard of her. Sorry. Well, I guess I'll say what this book is about before we get too into anything. Because this book basically follows three fictional women or girls. They're teenagers, late teens, I think is like their age. And it's basically following two immigrant women. They moved from one from Russia and one from Italy. They both moved to the United States of America for opportunity, and they began having to work at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory because one, women obviously didn't work very much. Two, they're immigrants, so it's not like they had like the best, easiest jobs and stuff to have to get. And three, like this is the most accessible because of buildings and like places like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, they were so desperate for workers they would hire absolutely anybody. And so there was not necessarily a discrimination for these two women who could not speak any English, and they would just get shown what to do and be severely exploited, which I mean something we still have happening within the United States. And then we also follow bourgeois teenage girl who learns about like the strikes and stuff of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory and feels very sympathetic to their cause and follows her journey with how she learns and sees how the exploitation of America that could be directly related to what her father does with his career, I would say. And it just follows these
Yeah.
three girls as going through girlhood and also working an absolutely horrible job. And other
In
things.
early America,
Yeah.
early 1900s, so
Yeah, it's like 1910, I think it starts, or maybe 1909, somewhere around there.
and if you don't know, like, in context, like, world history, this was, what, around the time, like, World War One. A lot of
Before
women
World
were
War
entering
One started in 1911, I think. So it was right before World War One.
right before, so, like, this is, like, a time in, like, history before, like, revolutions really started kicking off because during, like, that First World War, a lot of, like, socialists were against it, but then, like, when people weren't in those jobs, like, people had to fill the jobs, so I think this was, like, a time when, like, women started entering the workforce at, like, an exponentially, like, higher rate, just like it did in World War II.
Women's suffrage was a big thing on the table. A lot of women were began fighting for the rights to vote during this time frame, because I think women got the right to vote in I want to say 1921, could be 1919, somewhere around there, early 1920s. I know women got their right to vote then, so this is still before that, so it follows a lot of women's suffrage.
And when
And
we say that, we mean, like, white women, white bourgeois
yes,
white
what?
women, because women
Yes.
didn't really get the right to vote until, like, the 1965, realistically, and even then,
Yes.
it's still not, because we
And
don't even
it
have voting as, like, a federal holiday or anything, so
Yeah. And just to say, like, all 3 of these women too, like, I would say that this book is, like, a little diverse because, like, obviously, like, we have Bella and, Yetta that are both from, Russia and Italy respectively, but they also are 2 white immigrants as well, we should definitely
mhm.
focus on. So it's not like, so whereas, like, obviously they didn't speak English, so, like, somebody could identify them that way, but just walking in the street, somebody might not necessarily know that they weren't American in that way.
But also, this is, like, a time when, like, Italians were, like, racialized.
I think it was Irish people. I mean, Italians
I
probably
think
had a little
Italians too,
bit,
probably on the East Coast.
but I don't think it's as severe as
Yeah,
how, like, Irish and then obviously, like, Black people were and people from actually, like,
because I think that's why she probably picked those, like, the characters and, like, their backgrounds is because I think at this time, like, you probably didn't have a lot of, like, Black Americans working in factories, in the same
I
way
don't
that you
know.
would in the South, because I
Mhm.
don't think
'Cause this is in New
it
York
was
City as
to that
well.
point. Yeah.
Same.
Oh, because I think they would be, like, the most racialized at this point, where they were at because Yetta is Jewish too.
Oh, yes, I
So
did
I
mention
think
that.
that was, like, a relevant theme. So she picked these 2 in context. I would love to see her, like, do another one where it was, like, in the South, so she could have
Mhm.
a little bit more diversity, and I'm just curious how she would recommend or, represent different cultures. I also haven't read some of her other books, but, yeah, I
Yeah,
think that that might have been why she picked it, because that was one of my biggest things when I was reading it. I was like, "Why is there no, like, Black people
people.
in this book?"
Yeah.
But I don't know in the Triangle Shirtwig Factory if there was.
I don't know, I didn't do any outside research about that, so
I just
that
remember people burning. Like, that was, like, so the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory is, like, used in high school. They teach it as, like, why we have, like, rights in the workplace, and they have to have, like, fire escapes and, like, fire extinguishers and stuff
fire
because they
drills.
didn't do this. This is like the Titanic of, like, a workplace, like, where they don't have all of the extra stuff to save people's lives. They didn't, like, maintain any of the fire escapes. They, like, locked people in. It's really fucked up.
Yeah, like 143 people, workers ended up losing their lives in this fire. I think it was like 120 something women ended up losing their lives in this fire. So that's one of the main things too, because this was a business that was specifically mostly worked by women, not men. There were a few men that obviously died and that worked there as well, but they were such a small percentage of it. And it was, I think, very controversial during that time because one, women working is already a very controversial topic, especially then. And then two, just being such a devastating fire that apparently this was like the most deadliest uh, workplace death in New York until 9/11 happened.
Which is nuts to think
Yeah.
about.
So, like, the fact that it was, like, 100 years later just about, and then there was another, like, deadly people dying at work and stuff like that, which not necessarily the people inside the Twin Towers, so is it their fault that this attack happened, but, like, the bosses are directly responsible for the death of every single woman and man that died in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. Because basically what happened is that the idea was that either it was like a cigarette like spark or like a match spark and stuff because a lot of people smoked and stuff during that time. But of course, smoking around flammable clothing is not a very good idea, but it was also not enforced by a lot of the people that were in power. And so a large fire started and on the eighth floor, I guess. And so then anybody that was kind of above the eighth floor was kind of SOL. And they didn't have accessible staircases for people to use. Their fire escape didn't go all the way to the ground. They did not have accessible fire escape like in general, and they kept all the stairs locked so only people can use elevators. And of course, everyone nowadays knows it. In case every elevator says, in case of a fire, take stairs. Like, do not use the elevator and stuff like that, which is something that would not have been like a
Well,
rule
it's like
around this
the
time.
reason they didn't have it accessible is because they got tired of people taking breaks. And they
Yeah,
were worried that they were going to steal things. So they're
yeah.
like, okay, you can't take a break, and we don't want you to risk you stealing things. So we need to have
So you
security
have
guards at
to
the front
exit
to make sure you're not
one way.
stealing.
They made it so everyone exited the same way so that they could
Mhm.
easily check their bags and, like, things like that, where one, not only that, it's there's also, like, the major exploitation that these women receive because nowadays within work and stuff like that, you have to sign a contract that verifies your salary and what you get paid and stuff like that, and there's a lot more laws surrounding that versus back then, a lot of immigrant women, they didn't have very many rights, and these people could decide to pay someone or not pay someone based on how they were feeling that day. If they
Or
were
if you
like
like damage products, you didn't do it how
yeah.
they wanted, but mainly like they wanted to like punish you, they would like dock your pay.
Yeah. So it'd be like and these women were making no money a week. The main characters within the story were making $4, I think, most of the time, and then they went up to $5. So it's not like they were I don't know what inflation would be around that time, but I think that's maybe I would say comparative to like $100 paycheck, maybe comparing inflation from then to now, which is
Like these were
obviously
starvation wages.
yeah, like these people couldn't eat. And, it actually is true that, like, these women did go on strike, the year before it was, like, 15 months before the actual fire happened to try to get safer working conditions, better pay, and things like that. And it was, like, one of the most, like, important strikes to happen, at least in, like, US history for workers. But I think that's, like, the general plot of the story. I don't know if Ryan wants to talk about the author.
So there wasn't I had to do like all of this morning because I was slacking on the
Estimation I
author,
hit.
but she was born in the 60s, so she's like an older author. She's written a ton of teen books. She had a quote that says, like, in regards to her politics, I found this on Goodreads. It says, the government justifies keeping people or everyone else in poverty because people seem to work the hardest when they are right on the edge of survival. And I thought that was a really interesting quote from her. Um,
For good
apparently her
days.
series Among the Hidden, which I have those books. I don't know exact like the plot of it's really interesting. It's about like the people police. It's giving kind of like I don't know, like 1984, but also like
Oh.
I don't know. I gotta look into it more. But it was on the possible book ban list, and she was really upset. She supported the HarperCollins union strike in 2022, and then
Is that a
I didn't
controversy?
know. I guess
Okay.
author supporting a strike. I don't know. It could be controversial because I just looked up controversy and these popped up.
But
But
it
this is
says
like
she
the one that was.
supported the union strike, so isn't that a good
I
thing?
know. That's what you would think. You would think, right? But I guess it's
I
like
don't
how
know what the
we supported the
HarperCollins union
railroad
strike.
strikes and it was like viewed as bad
Oh, okay.
as like an author doing it.
I
I
don't
don't
know. Okay, anyways,
it's weird.
sorry.
You're
I
good.
don't know much about the HarperCollins union strike, so if anybody could tell us about that, we'd love to learn more.
But the final thing that I found was that the Village, like the M. Night Shyamalan movie,
Never seen
was
it.
like really closely related to Haddix's book in 1995 called Running Out of Time, which I haven't read, but there's like a whole article that I have linked in this that Kristen will have to like look over. But she was discussing whether or not she had the rights to a lawsuit because the one-to-ones for this story were very similar and she wrote it in 1995, so I thought that was really interesting. I haven't read Running Out of Time, so Might be
Maybe
interesting to
we
read.
should read
She has
it
some
and watch
very
them.
cool books though. If you look, she has like Just Ella, which is supposed to be like a Cinderella retelling where she like discusses patriarchy and stuff. And I have another
Hmm.
mutual who really loved that. But a lot of her other books are supposed to be very progressive for kids' books. So I've been trying to pick them up to see if I can get my 10-year-old to read them.
Oh,
Fingers
okay.
crossed, it works.
We'll
But
see.
so if you're looking for somebody that like writes progressive books, apparently the
We can only talk
census
about
I've
the one
gotten.
we've read. Yeah, which
Yeah,
is
I can only talk
Uprising.
about the ones I read. I've been trying to get a hold of some of the other ones, but it's not as easy as I would like it to be. Um, that's where we're at. So I'll try to read some of her other ones because running out of time sounds interesting if it's anything similar to The Village. And then also the like Among the Hidden. I have a couple of those books. I'm gonna read them this year. So we'll see. We'll see what it ends up being. There's not a whole lot of ratings for this book on Goodreads because I think it came out so long ago. So there's
Yeah,
only
it's like
9,000 reviews,
2007.
4.29 stars. So it rates pretty high
That's
among
pretty
like the
good.
10,000 reviews, right? Not horrible. And then I didn't go through like a lot of the praise because I figured like we are going to talk about it pretty positively. But some of the criticism was very strange, where somebody said that Haddix writes with all the delicacy of a brick through a stained glass window. Very dull reading and so messagey it hurts.
Which I don't. I mean, like the thing is that like the way. Did you read her author's note at the end of this?
I don't remember. I think I did.
Well, because she has like a whole author's note where she explains basically whenever she was writing this book or whatever, she wanted it to seem like, even though it's historical fiction, obviously, and like Bella and Yetta are made up characters and stuff, and she obviously had to change some stuff that happened like in real life to make it work for her fiction story, which obviously like the same thing happened in like Babel for like the Opium Wars and stuff like that. Like obviously some stuff was changed. Uh, I know she talked about in her, author's note that she changed some stuff, but she tried to make it all seem very realistic, so there's nothing that you would know that was changed unless you, like, specifically study the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory and history and stuff like that. If you, like, know that stuff like the back of your hand, that's the only way that you would have noticed, like, anything that was changed and stuff like that, and so I felt like it did come across very well as, like, being, like, an accurate representation, at least from what I learned in high school about, like, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory and what I've, like, read in, like, the Wikipedia page and stuff since I've been an adult. It seemed all very, like, matching, and so I don't understand why it's talking about how it's so messagey where, like, I guess she's putting across the idea that socialists and stuff are not necessarily bad people and that they are fighting for workers' rights, which is, like, actually what happened within history,
It
so
is
I don't know.
accurate. That's what doesn't make any sense. It's like it's accurate.
And
This
that's,
is
like
like what happened. So the type of people that would have been there, like who do you think was like leading these unions? They weren't just like randomly occurring. Like there was people who were principled. They had like union meetings. Like there was people
mhm,
that would come in.
and they had socialist
Where's the
speakers come.
messagey stuff?
And
What does that
I think
mean?
that's a lot of similar criticisms though that I remember people had for Babel and stuff like that, where they were like critiquing Letty or whatever her name is and stuff like that. But then it's also like people accurately portraying history is not messagey, it's just history.
I was like, this is historical fiction.
Yeah, so I don't know.
Anyways, some of the other ones was just like the dialogue is stilted and melodramatic. They're teenagers.
Yeah. I mean, I think they were obviously dramatic. They're 15, 16, 17 years old, I think, over the course of the book.
Mhm,
So obviously they're going to be a little silly and be a little dramatic about like stuff that's the end of the world to them is not being able to go to a dance. Yes,
mhm.
that's how teenagers are going to act. Like yes, of course they have to work a full-time job and they didn't get to go to school, but that's not their fault. That's society's fault for
I was like, Bella's illiterate and English is her second language.
language. Third language.
Yetta's,
She learned
yeah,
Yiddish
her language.
first.
Right? She learned Yiddish first, and then she learned English, and the same thing with Yetta because she came over from Russia. So
Like
like English is not their second language. So like she has they can't just be perfectly eloquently speaking when that's not like their native language. It's not going to make sense.
yeah. I don't know. I think some people also just are very nitpicky. I'm sure. Did you check these accounts and see what they rated 5 stars or no?
No, that was the one thing I didn't do is I didn't check to see what they
Usually
rated
you
5 star. And
do.
usually I do that because I like go on like a manhunt and I'm like, okay, well, what do you call a 5 star book? And it's like something stupid like Colleen Hoover.
I think what probably would have been what Goodreads needs to implement is like a letterbox where you go to someone's letterbox and it has their top 4 favorite movies. They should be able to have that for Goodreads where you can put your top 4 favorite books. So then you just go to someone's profile and then like they gave this book a bad review and you go to it and then you see like Haunting Adeline is their number 1. They're like, "Okay, that makes so much sense now," you know? Instead of having to like
That is
dissect
what I
their
need.
reviews. Um but I don't know, I think a lot of the criticisms I mean, I have some criticisms as well, which we can talk about whenever we get into the spoiler areas, but I do think I think it's overall a good book, and I don't think these con criticisms are necessarily in good faith.
Yeah, and there's not a whole lot we can talk about, like, with social media and whatnot, 'cause nobody's heard of this fucking book, and it's crazy, because I do think this is a great book for people to read, and it just creates such a good discussion like we're having now. Like, we get to,
Yeah.
like, discuss it, and I thought it was such a fun and I don't see that because like, the last time I got recommended a book, I have it somewhere on the shelf. I have Slaughterhouse, or Slaughter City by Naomi Wallace, and it's actually a play of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, and it's like done from like a like socialist perspective. So if you're looking
Oh,
for a play on this, like an adult play, I would love to see this in real life
a novel or in the play format
because it
or
is
a
a play.
movie.
Like it's written like a play, but I haven't seen it.
Did you read it?
Yeah,
Oh.
I read this and then I was man, I wish I had more, and I think that's why I like this book so much because it is more.
Other than that,
Anyways, I rated it 5 stars.
I gave
I
it 4
really
and a
liked it.
I gave it 4.5. I liked it as well. So I would say we're probably about to get into the spoilers though, and I would say if you like anything that's left leaning or anything like that, don't. I know some people listen to this and they listen to it even if they haven't read the book. I would implore anybody that hasn't read this book to stop and read this book before they get into our spoiler zone for this book because I do think it's very much worth reading. Definitely not Babel level, but I do think it is very good. Moving on to the spoilers.
What do we think? I think what I liked about this that I wasn't expecting, was that it was gonna be kind of like a found family, like these girls kind of like develop like a sisterhood,
Mm-hmm.
especially when
Like
you see
very
like
much
Yetta and
girlhood,
her
girl
sister
friendships.
Rahel.
Rahel? I don't know. There's no C, so.
Rahel was like originally part of the Bolshevik movement, and then she was like, "Yeah, this isn't gonna do anything" in like the early 1900s, and she
And she
like
also
moved
got
to the United States.
scared because
Yeah, so she
there
like
was a lot of attacks on Jewish women where I don't know what city she was in, but she said like one of her like neighbors' buildings got burned down and she saw like a girl her age, a Jewish girl getting burnt, and that's what scared her really bad too. So I mean like I can't necessarily blame her for being afraid, but then it's also like how principled are you really if you are so scared for stuff
mhm.
like that, which honestly, like, it's a more critique of her character and stuff like that, where I do think, Yetta almost like makes up for it because Yetta is like so strong willed in that way, where Yetta would have never left Russia if she was living in
Yetta
that.
was committed to the cause, like, through and
Hmm.
through. She went to the union meetings, like, she was talking, she was doing, like, as much as she could while working, and I really appreciate like, her character I think Chris and I both really enjoyed
Hmm.
her character
She
probably
was
the
definitely I
most.
think she was our favorite out of the 3 girls, which I don't not it's not me saying that I hate either the other 2 girls either. They're fine, I just don't think their stories are as compelling or necessarily as relatable as Yetta's story is to both of us, not necessarily with us being, like, immigrants or anything like that, but us being socialists, and I do think that Yetta kinda does give autistic vibes where she's kind of just, like, always relating stuff back to, like, the union or, like, socialism and stuff like that, and it's, like, so true, she's just like me for real.
Yes, like, the
Um,
whole reading, I was like, "Kristen's gonna gobble up this character, like, this is going to be her character."
and then I think one of my main critiques for Yetta, though, is that, and I feel like a lot of socialists or, like, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but, like, maybe more socialists with, like, the more negative messaging and stuff like that.
Like a nihilism.
Yeah, like the exactly, like, she like, Yetta had that more nihilist perspective where she felt herself because of the circumstances of her life and stuff like that, she felt like she couldn't experience any joy right now, and that's why I like the juxtaposition of Bella and Jane, where mostly Bella and stuff like that, where she did more stuff, where she was able to, like, bring joy to them now, and she like they both Bella and Jane I think were very important about like we should try to experience joy whenever we can even though everything isn't perfect in the world. And I think that's a lot of messaging that I think a lot of socialists and like on the online movement with such negativity and stuff being around all the time is that like you can actually experience joy, and capitalism tries to take away that joy, and so that's why you should still fight to experience joy whenever you can.
I'd have to agree. I do see people and they're like, we can acknowledge how much privilege we have in our
Mhm.
society, and like how like I'm so happy I'm not living under like an active like occupation or a genocide.
Mhm.
But me, like, self-inflicting punishment upon myself isn't going to necessarily change the situation. Like, I still as long as we're educating each other and, like, doing our best with what we have, like, you only get one life, and you have
Mhm.
to at least that's what our philosophy is. Um, where you have to make the most of it. Like, you have to like, what am I supposed to do? I have children. Like, I can't completely I'm not saying I'm gonna go to Disneyland every year or anything,
No, but I
but,
mean
like,
like
there's little things that we can do just to, like, be
experience
happy.
yeah. And like I think one thing I think that's a lot of critique, and then I know that like I think the best thing you can do is that like if you want to experience joy, and I think everyone should be allowed to experience joy even though some people obviously don't get that opportunity to experience joy in the same way that we do, or happiness, or being around your family, or doing whatever it is that makes you happy. I think one thing with us being in such a privileged perspective is also being aware that yes, not other people have the same privileges as we do, and we also need to be aware and educating that like other people are suffering and stuff like that, but that doesn't mean that we have to always be suffering as well. We should try to bring joy and happiness into our lives, our families' lives, our friends' lives, our communities' lives, and stuff like that. And I think doing stuff like mutual aid and things like that are great ways to bring joy to like people around you and things like that. But then also taking time for yourself to read a book you enjoy, watch a movie you enjoy, go to a theme park, go to a park, do whatever it is that
Mhm.
makes you happy. And I think that's one thing with Yetta's character that was very frustrating because she would harp on the negatives. And I think sometimes it's hard to not harp on the negatives, but that's why I think Bella and Jane were so refreshing as characters because they did bring joy into life and bring happiness
I think it
into
was, like, symbolic in Bella going and getting the rose,
the
right?
rose.
She
Yeah.
went and got the rose, she got a flower. 'Cause she's like, "At least we can make it colorful in here." Like, it was just a small thing, and it was, like, a frivolous
And it literally died the
little
next
piece of
day.
luxury. I
It,
do think she kind of exemplifies what Peter Kropotkin talks about in The Conquest of Bread, and like how luxury items are still a requirement for like a communist society to be completely fulfilled, because like we as human beings still have a desire for like art and like the little things like
yeah.
we don't need like boring beige baby lives. Like,
Hmm.
we need
We still
clothing,
need
like people
art
need
and
shelter. We
yeah.
still need, like, the good stuff though, like movies and art and music and
Hmm.
the parties and stuff, like, we're
Just
human
general
beings, like, we
joyous
thrive on
occasions.
community, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that maybe I guess I kind of wish Yetta did get to go dancing before she met her abrupt ending, where I think that could have been like a nice that I feel like could have made it hit more because you're like, dang, she finally because I think up until the end, like Yetta did get a little bit better, but she was still very like negative Nancy all the time and
Mhm,
stuff like that, where I kinda wish maybe, like, the week before she did finally say yes to Jacob going dancing, and then that's where you kinda got the more heart-wrenching of, like, their
mhm.
loss, because you're like, "Dang, this young love, this budding romance," and stuff like that, but you don't
I
even
just
get to see
liked how
that.
it never got to, like, take off, like, you could tell, like, she, like, gave him the cold shoulder and everything, and he was just, like, smitten.
Yeah, but I think that's why I think it could have been good where it's like she finally said yes to dancing like the night before. Like they went out Friday night dancing or whatever. And
Mhm,
then now it's and then the next Saturday or whatever whenever the fire happens and it's like she could have still been on that like high of like the dance and stuff like that and that happiness, and then it all comes crashing down into her reality again.
mhm,
I think that could have been more compelling for her character. um, I was happy that Jane died. I will say that was a great thing for me to read.
mm.
No offense to
We
Jane, I
both
think
wanted Jane to die, and I think in the beginning, because we see this like, okay, this is a bourgeois white woman, suffragette. She's gonna be
mhm,
racist and all this stuff, and she does. She's like basically like the Angles. Like she is an actual class traitor. She abandons all of her like
wealth,
material comforts to be part of it. She doesn't have any skills, and at that point in time, like a lot of people start working when they're like children, so she doesn't have any marketable skills. If she were to go and work and try to work the line like Bella and Yetta, she would have gotten fired. There's no way that she would have been able to do that. So she used the skills that she had, which were like housemaking and whatnot. And she's like, okay, I'll go work for this. And they were able to like get her in with like the manager or whatever and like
family, and, like, take care like,
teach the
basically be her
kids.
nanny.
Yeah. So she becomes a nanny. And I thought that was a really nice because like what else would you do if you were to abandon that? What
Yeah.
do you have left? Like how do you support yourself?
But the thing is, I feel like that not necessarily is not like a fair thing because like other people do lose like the jobs that they're not like the jobs that they're most qualified for and they end up losing those jobs and then they end up doing something that they were necessarily never like
Hmm.
qualified for, but then they have to learn on the spot. And I mean like Bella, even though she did have some like hand sewing. Like she never worked with a machine or anything, and like obviously she had a little bit more practical skills, but she still went in there knowing nothing, and she was still getting bullied and yelled at whenever she first started. I mean, she started working there as a learner, didn't get paid for her first week of work, and she still immediately picked it up because that's what was required for her survival. And I think for anyone's survival, that's what's required of them. That's what they do, and I don't
Yeah,
necessarily.
she definitely could have. I don't know. It's very weird. Like if you're raised from such a young age and you have people take care of you and like you're just like meant to be like a trophy wife, like she literally did nothing. Like she had people clean up after her, make her
Yeah,
bed.
dust her
All
clothes,
she did
dress
was
her
like
up.
go shopping. Like her purpose was to be like married off as like a token for like their own little like familial hierarchy and like maintain like that family like familiar wealth and like generational wealth.
I mean, she had a gift for languages. I mean, she learned a bunch of languages in school and stuff
Mhm.
like that. So I don't know if maybe she could have ended up doing something with that. Because I mean, like, I think because Jane had such a willingness to learn and she was a good learner, that I think she could have worked at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, where I
Mhm.
feel like that could have been maybe more compelling than just her, oh, I happen to be at the factory whenever the fire happens because I brought
Yeah, for, like, the
the daughters here
storyline,
for
I
the
do
daughters.
think, like, practically, it would've made more sense if she was, like, an entry level, like, the way,
Bella
um,
was.
Bella was.
Yeah. Where I mean, I'm glad. I mean, I think her ending was sad, of course, but there is a quote because Mariah's like, "Oh, she's such a class traitor. She's such a class traitor." But there was this line where I was like, whenever she goes, she's like, wait for me, Jane sobbed. Oh, please wait for me. A huge crowd stood between Jane and the elevator, all screaming and shoving their way in. Oh, but you have to save me, Jane yelled. Don't you know who I am? I'm. And then she gets cut off. She stopped. What was she gonna say? I'm Jane Wellington. I'm from a witch family. I'm from the Blanix girls' governess. I'm planning to go to college. I'm due for a grand tour of Europe. What did any of that matter? Why was her life worth anything more than anyone else's? The doors were closing, and then she was like saying, "Oh, I don't want to die." And then there was an old woman that was there. It's like none of us do. And then she was accepting her death, but in a way that I felt like if she really changed, she wouldn't have immediately been like, "Do you know who I am?"
I feel like it was, like, a secondhand thought, though. Like, I mean, at least she came around to it, and she was like, "Well, shit," like, it was just, like, a fleeting moment. I don't think
Yeah.
she dwelled on it. I think it was something that just, like, came and went.
Yeah, but it's still just like something that is just like, oh, like does that show to like us that like once bourgeois you're always bourgeois in that way because it's like she still hadn't fully unlearned her thinking
No, I
in
think
the
it was, like,
ways.
if you take it from the perspective of it being, like, a teen book or, like, Hunger Games like, level, like, that type of, like, teen, like, novel, like, I think they're just trying to, like, get into, like, the kids' head that, like, oh, like, she like, that message across
Mm.
was, like, why is, like, somebody of the economic ruling class's life more valuable? So I think it's, like, one of those moments where I could see, like, people's criticism of it being, like, messagey,
Mhm.
but how do you deliver that to, like, a 12 or 13-year-old?
I mean, that's
Like,
very
would they be
true,
able
and
to
then
extract it?
I mean, like, that's the thing is because, like, that's also a thing too where I think it's a lot more, like, introductory to socialism and stuff like that, because, like, half of this stuff that they're fighting for, I'm like, "Yeah, I already know this," you know? And so it's like,
Mhm,
whenever, like, Jane's like, "Oh, why is my life worth more than another?" It's like, it's not. You only feel like it's worth more because it's your own life, you know? And then you're
mhm.
also like, that's why you think that. But I don't know. I didn't necessarily love Jane as a character overall, but I think that's kind of just because of Jane as a character in general and because of her circumstances. But this is also not me saying that like I would not work with the bourgeois. I mean, I wouldn't, but like a teen girl that's a bourgeois, I can't hold her as accountable as you can like higher up people that are
Mhm.
actually making those decisions and continuing to do that. But I do think that she was just kind of like a lackluster character where maybe if she was more developed in ways, it could have hit more too for her death. And
Yeah,
so
because her death, like, it was sad, but it wasn't,
it was no Yetta's death.
remarkable. Yetta's death was just it got me in the feels when I was reading it because I it was just so
Didn't you record
sad
your
that she was so much.
reaction?
I did.
Yeah.
I think it got me because then I, like, got to think, I was like, "Man, there's a whole building of all of these, like, socialists who have promise, and because of, like, their neglect of their workers, like, they like, who like, real life shit is, like, all of these people were in this building, and they could have had such, like, an enormous, like, impact
They all
with
had their
other
own
people.
lives. They had their own
They have
children. They had
lives,
their
families,
family.
children, and, like, just for, like, the movement as a
Once,
whole, like, all
yeah.
of that was stunted because of, like, capitalist pursuit of profits over people's safety, and it
Mm,
just made me so frustrated. I anytime I, like, learn about, like, workers' rights movements or, like, anything, I get so frustrated and, like, emotional, and,
yeah.
like, that one just really, like, I had to, like, step back, and I was like, "This is really fucking sad."
Yeah. Because, like,
Especially,
even
like,
though
Yetta.
Yetta is a fictional character and probably didn't actually exist within the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. But I think the idea is that there was a teen girl that was there at one point that did work there, that possibly worked there at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, or even a young adult woman and stuff like that that still lost all of her life and all of her potential because of profits over people being America's
Mhm,
founding ideals, and it still is America's ideals. Because I mean, and the author's note I thought was really good too because they talk about, like, multiple workers, like, deaths and stuff like that that is still happening in other countries that are, like this obviously came out in 2007, so I think our author's note only goes to 2007, but still, like, in the late 90s and stuff like that, there's still so many, like, workers that are getting killed in, like, different extreme circumstances in other countries and stuff like that, where maybe it doesn't happen as often in America now, but it's still happening elsewhere. And even not to mention like the people in like the Congo with the mines and stuff like there, which is like a constant genocide that's happening there. And like people dying and children dying in those mines because they don't have the same rights that workers do have in America, you know?
yeah, it's just, like, the fact that we live in a society where, like, we have to subject ourselves and our personal safety so that we can sustain our own existence is like, it makes sense. We read about it. I've read Capital. I've read all like, Communist Manifesto. I've read all of this shit, and it's just, like, recontextualizing it into, like, one particular example in, like, workers' history. Oh, it hits me in the guts. Just I get so frustrated that, like, human beings think that, like, being greedy is an innate, like, human attribute, and that we
Mhm.
simply cannot overcome it because it's just human nature.
Which I don't think it but that's one thing where it's, like, a big debate within, like that's, like, the main debate between, like, communists and, like, libertarians and, like, other things like that, where it's, like, I think with mine and Mariah's perspective is that, like, most people are not born greedy. You're born as a baby, you're born wanting your needs, like, you want food, you want water, you want shelter, you want to be safe, you want to be with your mother. Where I think those are, like, basically the same principles that I mean people run on today. You want to be with your family, you want to have time to yourself, you want to be able to experience joy. That is what people want. But the problem is that there's a select few that are so greedy and that they want so much more within their lives because of whether how it's because they were raised, because of what they believe, whatever social ideas that were implemented into them is what makes these people cause suffering on the masses rather than all of us coming together and
It's
being able
like
to experience joy.
what? The illusion of meritocracy.
Mhm. It's like you have a chance one day where you could be exploiting everyone else too. Where it's like a lot of the times it just so happens to be you're lucky enough to be born into a wealthy family. Is that's how like I think it's like I don't know, like a large percentages of businesses and like CEOs and stuff like that are like their families were in business or like owned certain businesses and things like that for them to be able to do that. So,
Circle back. That's primarily why. I just like the loss of potential, and then I just like started like recontextualizing it. So it wasn't necessarily like Yetta's death was really sad, and
mhm.
it was very sweet how it went. Like her and Jacob, I really appreciated that, and then it's just recontextualizing. So I wasn't just sobbing over the book. I
Yeah.
just want to
It's
clarify.
like in
I'm gonna.
workers in general and their actual deaths that we actually like had to happen in American history for us to get the opportunity to have fair workplaces basically. And it's sad that so many people had to lose their lives just for us to get safety in the workplace, where this should have just been the default. And I think
But I
that's
think
what's
this
so
is a good
tragic.
a segue because we have those two deaths, and then we have Bella.
Yes.
And
Our
Bella
sole
was able
survivor.
to escape, and she saved the two little girls, which you see at the beginning. So like we have a full circle moment. And I think this is where like the valid criticism can come into play, is like the resounding message to the end of this book, which is what upset Kristen.
Yeah. The ending was very disappointing. Which I don't know if you necessarily got the same disappointment where it's like I love Bella as a character, where obviously I think that she could have been like a baby socialist and like the ways because like whenever she obviously was a scab because she didn't speak any Yiddish or English whenever she was going to work, so she didn't actually know like what the strikes meant or anything like that because nobody taught her anything. And once she finally sat down and learned what had happened and like found out that she lost her family and learned that like oh like we're actually fighting so that we can get paid more and not get cheated more, then she's like instantly like oh that's what I want to do. Like I don't want to be going to work and not doing like I don't want to be like crossing the picket line or anything like that. Like I had no idea what was going on. And so then she's able to learn and fight for like worker safety and workers rights and stuff like that and better pay and stuff like that so that her and her friends and her of course, like the fellow workers and stuff could all be able to survive without scraping pennies and things like that. But I think with the ending of with Harriet, which is one of the girls that Bella ended up saving, which is one of the daughters of one of the managers of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, um, like the way that like she kind of has to like educate Harriet felt very lackluster where she was just kind of like because Bella lost her two closest friends in that fire, she lost her family. So obviously she's kind of like a sad older woman because she doesn't have like her family and stuff. She was able to get a new family or whatever. But it was just like it felt like, oh, like, well, if you have money, then you can actually have a good life, is kind of how like the ending ended up wrapping up. Because the overall story with her husband is that like her husband ended up getting disowned by his family and then adopted by a rich family and then he became a doctor and then she married him or whatever and then it was just like oh like we actually have wealth now and so now we're all happy. Like obviously that doesn't bring back their deaths but like we're better off than what we were and so that's kind of like what ended up happening. And like the way that Harriet seems like she could never understand because she wasn't willing to ever give up her wealth either like Jane was.
Yeah, I was just trying to remember like the finishing line because it kind of gives like a very like ambiguous, and I think it's meant to try to like this does feel like something like that was written for kids in school so that the teacher could like have a guiding conversation because it's a
Mhm.
bit ambiguous with the ending. You can kind of like draw your own conclusions from it, and I think by her intentionally killing off the revolutionary and also intentionally killing off the economic ruling class, it puts Bella in a very like kind of central position where she's not quite
Yes.
on either end. She's kind of just taking what she's learning and developing her own opinions. And I think that's why she chose Bella specifically. But she
Mhm.
ends it by saying to her daughter's hair, like because she names her daughter Yetta.
Mhm.
She says, "We will not be stupid girls. We will not be powerless girls. We will not be useless girls." And then like that was like their mantra. So like it full circles. Like what exactly does she mean by that?
Yeah. Where, like, it could I think you could get that messaging of, like, girl boss, gatekeep,
Mm-hmm.
gaslight, that, like, sort of, like, messaging where I think that's why I almost, like, would wanna gatekeep this for specifically if you're not a socialist reading this, because it can kinda give that messaging where you're like, "Oh, if we just break the glass ceiling, if we have more women in power, women president, women CEOs, then we're no longer stupid, no longer girls." But then in reality, that just becomes girls exploiting other women and men and stuff like that. And so I don't necessarily like that stance, and I feel like since it is so open-ended that you get that versus Babel having such a solidified ending, with it being Babel and the necessity of violence, that is why I think this will never be a Babel for me, because it's not so, like, straight to the point.
Clear cut.
You can't interpret this any other way. You're knowing this is for, like, a socialist movement for, like, actual, like, rights of the people versus this where this is like, yes, rights of the people, but also be good about it, you know? Where I think that's like a lot more like liberal perspective. And then they're like, oh, well, we can just vote for change and stuff like that. Where it's like, no, no,
Well, he was
but
voted out.
yeah, just vote out
It was
fascism,
a
guys. That's on your ballot.
it was a good read though, and I'm glad that you finally read it. And I'm hoping that that helped bring you out of your reading slump
We'll
a
see.
little
It's the
bit.
only book I finished so far this month. So, but I mean, I did read it quick. I read it in like 2 or 3 days. So,
It's just one of those books I'm gonna add. Like people will ask, like, "Oh, like what are left wing books?" I'm like, "Okay, well, we have Babel, we have Ring Shout, and we have
yeah.
Uprising." Like I think these are really solid books that you can like. If you just want something nice, if you're just getting into fiction, perhaps read it. Or if you just want to read something that's not like dark romance, I don't know, maybe read it. You might like it.
um, yeah, I think overall, I mean, I enjoyed it. I do wish it definitely makes me, I would be interested in reading more Margaret Haddix's books if you find them worth reading, because I know since you love this, you're gonna like read all of her books now.
I'm
So,
gonna see. I'm gonna see what it ends up being, like
and
what the
then
other ones.
if those end up being worth it, maybe we'll check it out. But I do wish there's a more clear cut ending. But and then also I think like Bella ended up marrying Rocco was kind of just like, oh, like that kind of like
I
fan
just try to
servicey
pretend that's not.
in the
I
book.
pretend it didn't happen.
Because like I thought if her marrying Charles could have been actually interesting because he actually like ended up doing research about like the strikes and found out like what
Mhm.
we could have done. But then it's just like, oh, Bella actually married the little boy that followed her around and had a crush on her the whole time. Which I know he's not like a little boy, he was only like 2 years younger than her, but the way that he was described, I thought he was like 10, bro, the whole
So did
time.
I. I thought he was very juvenile.
Yeah, like I'm gonna try to guess. I don't know if that's how maybe little boys just be acting, but other than that, I don't know if we have any more closing
I don't
thoughts.
think so. If anyone has any books that are similar to these, I would love to read them. I know we have some good ones on our list.
Mhm.
Like I'm gonna check out the Ursula Le Guin books
Oh
because
yeah.
I've heard that those are very good. And then I can't remember what the other ones are. We have some good ones on the list though.
Yeah,
Don't
but
you worry.
if there's any ones you want us to prioritize, let us know and we probably will. But other than that, don't forget to donate to Muhammad's family. They're almost met their goal. So, very good things. We would like to help them get out of Gaza as soon as possible. Other than that, thank you and good night.